I told everyone I was protecting my family, but the truth is I was destroying someone's life piece by piece. Now they're gone and I can't decide if I'm relieved or terrified of what comes next. My boyfriend once looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't allowed to be alone with my dad anymore. Not because of anything real, but because, in his words, the way he looks at you? It's not right. And if you keep entertaining it, that's basically emotional cheating. When I called him out for twisting perfectly normal family moments into something disgusting, he smirked and said, "No woman should be that close to her father." I just stared at him. That was 9 months ago. And this morning? He was sobbing in my DMs from prison. It all started at Target. I was with my dad, helping him pick out a little plant for his hospital room. He'd just gotten some bad news about his health, when my phone buzzed. A text from my boyfriend Oscar, "We need to talk." That night over dinner he dropped his rule on me. No more being alone with dad. No more coffee dates. No more visits. And if I didn't cut it off he'd see it as cheating. Here's the thing, I'm usually the go-with-the-flow type. The peacekeeper. I avoid drama, even if it means people walk all over me. But this was my dad. The man who had just been diagnosed with prostate cancer. Treatment was starting soon. There was no way I was letting Oscar's paranoia keep me from him. Still, I couldn't just break up with Oscar. I'd been single for 2 years before him, and I could already hear my family's voices in my head. What did you do wrong this time? They'd never believe what he actually said about dad. So, I made a choice. Not peace. Not breakup. War. I looked at him sweetly and said, "You're right, babe. I'll be careful. Thanks for looking out for me." And he bought it. Every single word. Week 1 I played it subtle. Skipped coffee with dad saying I had work. Oscar beamed, smug with proof that he was right. Dad texted me, confused, asking if everything was okay. I left him on read. And hated myself for it. Week 2 I stepped it up. Told my mom I couldn't help dad prep for treatment because Oscar thinks we spend too much time together. Confusion spread through the family group chat. I stayed vague, he's just protective. Week 3 I made it a performance. At Grandma's birthday dad came over to ask about my job. I jumped up, grabbed Oscar's arm and pretended to panic. He rescued me. People noticed. Whispers started. At Sunday dinner dad asked me to pass the salad. I froze. "Oscar, is this okay? Is this safe?" The room went silent. My sister's eyes lit up like she'd figured something out. The piece de resistance? My Google Calendar. I literally color-coded family events by safe zones, green if dad wasn't there, red if he was, and shared it with Oscar's entire extended family. The breaking point came at a barbecue at my place. My aunt casually asked, "Where's your dad?" In front of everyone I smiled and said, "Oscar helped me realize dad has romantic feelings for me. So I've had to cut contact for everyone's safety." The air vanished. My sister Olivia's eyes went wide. My aunt gasped. Oscar went pale. I kept going. He noticed things I never did. The way dad hugs me, looks at me, it's all very sexual. Oscar stammered, "That's not exactly what I cut him off, gushing, "You're so protective." That's when I felt his nails dig into my arm, his silent warning, "Shut up or else." So I forced a laugh. "Kidding. We just have a weird sense of humor. Dad's not here because he has chemo today." Still, I could feel the suspicion hanging in the air. The next morning, pounding at the door woke us up. Oscar's mom and sister stormed in like a hurricane. "Where is he?" Oscar stumbled into the living room. Slap. The sound cracked through the apartment. "You told her that her father wants her romantically?" His mom demanded. Jim called me sobbing. Sobbing? What is wrong with you? Oscar tried to spin it. "She's twisting it." I just said. His sister cut in, voice sharp as glass. "That fathers can't love their daughters without it being sexual? That family affection is gross? That's what you said." He snapped back, ranting about boundaries and inappropriate dynamics, claiming no one understood what he saw. The more he talked, the uglier it got. And I watched as his family's faces shifted from shock to horror. His mom turned to me, took my hand and said, "Pack your things. Now." We were barely 10 minutes into the drive when Rachel turned to me, her voice soft but heavy. "He's done this before to his last 3 girlfriends. Olivia. Monica. Kate. According to him, they all had inappropriate dads." She hesitated, then looked at me with tears in her eyes. I never believed them until now. 3. That word hit me like a punch to the chest. From the driver's seat, Helen's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I failed him as a parent," she muttered. I shook my head. "No, you didn't fail. He showed me exactly who he is. I just made sure everyone else saw it too." That's when my phone buzzed. I glanced down and froze. The thumbnail alone made my stomach drop. It was that video. The one from our 3rd month together, back when I still trusted him enough to be in his bed without worrying about hidden cameras. His message read, "You think you won? You forgot I still have this." My hands started shaking. Rachel must have noticed because she reached over, gently took the phone from me, and her face drained of all color when she recognized it. Helen glanced back. "What did he send?" I couldn't even get the words out. My throat locked up. Rachel answered for me, "It's an intimate video. From early in their relationship." The car went silent for 3 full seconds. Then Helen slammed her hand against the steering wheel. "We're going straight to the police. Minnesota has strict revenge porn laws, and we'll both testify about his history with Monica and Kate." Rachel was already on her phone, pulling up the statute. Gross misdemeanor. He could actually serve time. A strange mix of relief and dread washed over me as Helen steered toward downtown Minneapolis. At the police station, Officer Janet Williams led me into a small interview room while Helen and Rachel waited outside. They'd already given their statements about Oscar's pattern with his exes. I told Officer Williams everything, how Oscar had filmed me without my knowledge, how he was now using that video to threaten me after I'd left him. She typed as I spoke, explaining the legal process. They'd need a warrant for his devices, but the case was solid, especially with Helen and Rachel's testimony. She handed me a case number, her direct line, and walked me back to the waiting area. By the time we got back to Helen's place, 3 hours had passed. I sat on the bed in their guest room, finally texting my dad. "I'm safe. Oscar's gone. I'm so sorry for everything I put you through." He replied within seconds. Not with questions. Not with anger. Just, "Want to get coffee tomorrow?" Usual spot. That broke me. Completely. Rachel had left a notebook on the nightstand, Monica's diary from 2 years ago. As I flipped through it, my stomach churned. The exact same tactics. The slow isolation from her father. The jealousy over completely normal family moments. Twisting everything into something perverse. Monica had written about missing her dad's birthday because Oscar claimed it was inappropriate for grown daughters to celebrate with their fathers. About him monitoring her texts. About how it felt like her world was shrinking one person at a time. The next morning, I met Dad at our coffee shop on Hennepin Avenue. He looked thinner from chemo, but his eyes were still warm as he slid my vanilla latte across the table. He told me Olivia had called after the barbecue, convinced something was off. I broke. Told him everything, the accusations, the threats, the video. When I finally stopped, he pulled out a small notebook from his jacket. Pages of his own notes. He'd been documenting every strange thing since that barbecue, the flinches, Oscar's possessive gestures. He and Mom had even reached out to a domestic violence counselor. They'd been planning an intervention. But Helen beat them to it. And that's when I realized, my family never believed Oscar's disgusting story. Not for a second. Then his chemo schedule slipped out of his wallet, and my heart sank seeing all the appointments he'd gone to alone while I played Oscar's twisted long game. The guilt was crushing. Dad squeezed my shoulder. "You were protecting us both. I get it." Then my phone buzzed again. An unknown number. It was Oscar, using someone else's phone. Drop the police report in 24 hours or the video goes to your work, your LinkedIn, your entire contact list. Before I could even process it, Helen texted me. Oscar had sent the exact same threat to Rachel. They were screenshotting everything for the police. Minutes later, Officer Williams called, said they just expedited the warrant based on the new threats. 2 days later, Helen drove me downtown to meet her lawyer, Patricia Kim. The building had security guards checking IDs at the entrance. Patricia, short gray hair, glasses, all business, spread out our evidence on her desk, screenshots, police reports, written statements. She explained calmly that his threats counted as criminal coercion on top of the revenge porn charges. She highlighted sections of the law in yellow and slid the forms toward me. We were going after him on every front. The next morning, walking back into work felt wrong. Everyone else was laughing about their weekends, gossiping about office drama, and complaining, again, about the broken coffee machine. And there I was, pretending to be normal while my phone sat face down on my lap during the morning marketing meeting. Every time it buzzed, my stomach clenched. By lunch, I was stabbing at a sad little desk salad when my sister Olivia called. Her voice was urgent. She'd been digging online and found LinkedIn messages. Oscar had reached out to 3 of my coworkers, pretending to plan a surprise for me, but really fishing for details about my schedule, and who I ate lunch with. My hands shook as she read the screenshots aloud. After that call, I jumped every time someone walked past my cubicle. My supervisor kept giving me these strange, searching looks, and I couldn't stop wondering, did she know something? That evening, Helen and Rachel picked me up after work to go pack my things from the apartment. I couldn't stay there anymore, not with Oscar still having a key. But the second we walked in, I knew something was off. The photos on the wall were crooked. My laptop wasn't on the kitchen table where I'd left it. Rachel immediately started snapping pictures of everything. Helen opened the fridge and froze. Stuck to the door was a single note in Oscar's handwriting. "You have 48 hours. Helen's voice was like steel when she called Officer Williams. I tore through the apartment and confirmed my worst fear. My work laptop was gone. So were several USB drives and the external hard drive with all my family photos. 20 minutes later, Mom arrived straight from Dad's chemo appointment, hospital visitor badge still pinned to her shirt. Without a word, she started folding my clothes into boxes with the laser focus of someone doing their taxes. Rachel kept documenting every missing item while Helen stayed on the phone with the police. Mom muttered under her breath about what she'd do if she got her hands on Oscar. The next morning, Officer Williams called. They'd issued a warrant for breaking and entering, theft, and criminal threats, but Oscar wasn't at his apartment or his job, and his phone was off. They were tracking his credit cards, contacting friends. For now, all we could do was wait. I worked from my parents' kitchen table while Dad napped on the couch, pale and drained from chemo. Mom changed every lock in the house and installed security cameras, fussing over the angles until she could see every corner of the property from her phone. That night, we made spaghetti like it was any other Tuesday, but every car that drove past made me flinch. Sleeping in my childhood room was worse, lying there, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck to the ceiling years ago, waiting for something to happen. The next afternoon, Rachel texted me urgently. She'd found my laptop. Apparently, Oscar had left it at his friend Derek's place. Derek, confused, had called her. He had no idea what was going on. Once Rachel explained, he was horrified and agreed to give a statement to the police. When the police recovered the laptop, they found Oscar had been trying to access my work email. He was looking for proof that I was having an affair with Marcus, a coworker who'd helped me on a project last month. Patricia, my lawyer, wasted no time. She filed for an emergency restraining order using all the new evidence. The judge granted it immediately, though she warned me, it's just paper if he decides to ignore it. 3 days later, Dad insisted on going to chemo, even though Mom wanted him to rest. I went with him, sitting in one of those cold, stiff chairs while the 4 dripped into his arm. He talked about how cancer had taught him that avoiding problems never makes them disappear, and that sometimes you fight even when you're scared out of your mind. His hand was ice cold when he squeezed mine, but his eyes were still strong. The nurse came in to check his IV, so I stepped out. That's when my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. It was Marcus, Oscar's best friend from college. His voice was shaky. Oscar had shown up at his place drunk, ranting that I'd set him up and destroyed his life. Marcus had started recording when Oscar got specific, admitting he'd taken my laptop and laying out in detail how he planned to destroy me piece by piece. I could hear Oscar's slurred voice in the background. Every word was worse than the last. Marcus said he was driving Oscar back to his apartment, planning to call the police as soon as he passed out. Back in Dad's hospital room, Mom returned with coffee, smiling at how he was sitting up straighter, cracking jokes about the food. We played cards and watched old sitcoms on the tiny TV, laughing like nothing was wrong. But at 2 a.m. my phone rang again. It was Detective Janet. They'd arrested Oscar at his apartment after Marcus called in the recording. He was now facing multiple charges, violating the restraining order, breaking and entering, and stealing my laptop, which they found hidden in his closet. The bail hearing was tomorrow. And Janet suggested I be there with Patricia to show the judge exactly what kind of man he really was. That night I didn't sleep. I just sat in that hard hospital chair, watching my dad breathe and bracing myself to see Oscar face to face again. The next afternoon, I met Patricia outside the courthouse. She was holding a thick folder, the kind that screams this is going to be bad for the other side. Inside, Marcus's recording, security footage from my building, and written statements from Oscar's mom and sister about his long history of controlling behavior. When we walked into the courtroom, Oscar looked wrecked. He was unshaven, with deep shadows under his eyes, and his once perfect designer suit was rumpled like he'd slept in it. His lawyer tried to spin the whole thing into a misunderstanding, a lover's spat gone too far. Claimed Oscar wasn't dangerous, that this was just a personal dispute. Then Patricia stood. Calm. Precise. She laid it all out piece by piece. The recording of Oscar spelling out exactly how he planned to ruin me. Photos of my trashed apartment. The sworn statements from multiple people who'd seen him do this before. When she played the part of the recording where Oscar described in chilling detail how he'd destroy my reputation and career step by step, I saw the judge's jaw tighten. After 20 minutes, the decision came: $50,000 bail, GPS ankle monitor, no contact with me or my family, mandatory anger management. As we stepped out into the hallway, Helen walked up to me, tears streaming. She grabbed my hands and whispered apology after apology, for believing him over every girlfriend who came before me. For convincing herself that they were crazy or clingy, instead of seeing what her son really was. She couldn't even finish her sentence before she walked away, shoulders shaking. A week later, Patricia called. Oscar had posted bail through a bondsman. He was out, monitored, yes, but free to walk the streets. She promised me any violation would put him right back behind bars. Still, I changed the locks on my apartment and stopped sleeping in the same place 2 nights in a row. Mom insisted I stay with them most nights. She even restored my old bedroom exactly as it was in high school, stuffed animals and all. For a while, things were quiet. 2 weeks. Then my boss called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable. He slid a printed email across the desk. It was from a concerned colleague, claiming I was mentally unstable. Attached were screenshots of my social media, normal posts about being tired or stressed from Dad's cancer, twisted into something sinister. HR suggested I take some time off until the situation settled down, even after I showed them the restraining order and police reports. That same afternoon, Olivia called in a panic. She'd been getting bizarre Facebook messages from an account with my name and profile picture. It wasn't me. The fake account was sending unhinged, rambling messages to our family and my professional contacts, just believable enough to plant seeds of doubt. Every message contained personal details only someone close to me would know, but twisted until I looked paranoid and unstable. Olivia kept reporting the accounts, but every time one got shut down, another popped up. The precision of it all, the speed, the tech savviness, felt professional. For days, I sat in my childhood bedroom, scrolling through message after message from concerned cousins, confused colleagues, old friends asking if I was okay. Each fake message was more elaborate than the last, stories about breakdowns, conspiracies, and erratic behavior. Mom would bring me tea and sit quietly on my bed, rubbing my back while I showed her screenshot after screenshot of my life being dismantled in real time. Then, 3 days later, I got a call from Dad's oncologist. Urgent. Someone, claiming to be me, had called to cancel all of Dad's upcoming chemo appointments. The office had caught it when the voice didn't quite sound right. They called Dad to confirm, but by then he'd already missed 1 treatment. My hands shook with fury. This wasn't just about me anymore, he was going after Dad. Patricia immediately filed new charges for harassment and impersonation. But she warned me, proving it was Oscar behind the fake accounts would be nearly impossible. Whoever was doing it was smart, VPNs, public Wi-Fi, no traceable connection back to him. Too clean. Too careful. Either Oscar had learned these tricks himself, or he'd hired someone to carry out his revenge while he sat there with his ankle monitor, looking compliant on paper. The next morning, I was halfway through making coffee when my phone lit up with a call from my bank's fraud department. The woman on the line explained that someone had tried to get into my accounts 3 separate times overnight. The kicker? They'd used my security questions, my first pet's name, the street I grew up on, answers only Oscar would know. We'd literally filled out those forms together months ago when we combined accounts. She told me the attempts had been blocked, but strongly advised I close everything and start over at an entirely new bank. So I spent the whole morning buried in phone calls, trying to remember every automatic payment and random subscription I'd set up over the years. I was still on hold with my credit card company when Mom called. A flower delivery had just shown up at their door, a massive bouquet of white roses and baby's breath. The exact arrangement Oscar had brought on our first date. The card read, "Thinking of you during this difficult time," typed and signed. Could have been from anyone. But Mom and I both knew. She took pictures, then dumped the whole thing in the trash. Message received. 2 days later, Rachel arrived at my place with a banker's box in her arms and exhaustion in her eyes. She'd spent the past week tracking down Oscar's exes and compiling their stories. It wasn't just Monica and Kate. There was also a woman named Jennifer from 4 years ago, someone none of us had even heard about. Rachel spread the files across my kitchen table, police reports, HR complaints, restraining orders. The same cycle over and over, isolation, control, escalation, then complete destruction once they tried to leave. Jennifer's file was the thickest. Pages of evidence showing how Oscar had obliterated her nursing career with anonymous complaints to her licensing board about drug theft and patient abuse. All lies, but enough to ruin her professionally. 2 weeks passed in this awful limbo, waiting for the next strike. I finally decided to try going back to work, desperate to feel normal for even a few hours. But when I swiped my key card at the office, nothing. The security guard avoided my eyes as he explained I'd need clearance from HR before I could come in. He didn't have to say it, I could feel the weight of the rumors hanging over me. That night, Olivia's husband, Tom, came by with his laptop. His face was pale. He'd been trying to lock down my accounts and found something. Months ago, Oscar had convinced me to install a program called Family Guard on my old laptop, saying it was for extra antivirus protection. Turns out it was parental monitoring software, legal but invasive, that tracked every keystroke, every password, every website. Tom showed me the logs, failed login attempts on my email, social media, banking. From all over the city. It was like Oscar was systematically trying to break into every corner of my life. And now, even with my passwords changed, he probably knew my patterns well enough to guess them again. 3 days later, I went with Dad to chemo. I was trying to be upbeat, focusing on him, when the patient in the chair beside us leaned over. She said she'd read my post in a cancer support forum, the one where I apparently talked about struggling with my father's inappropriate attachment during his treatment. I froze. I had never posted in any forum. She showed me her phone. There were dozens of posts under a username almost identical to mine, twisting real details into something sick and delusional. Dad squeezed my hand and told me to ignore it, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. Oscar wasn't just attacking me anymore, he was using my father's illness as a weapon. The real blow came the next morning. Helen called, sobbing so hard I could barely make out her words. Oscar had emptied his trust fund, nearly $200,000, and vanished after cutting off his ankle monitor in a downtown parking garage. Security footage showed him climbing into a car with its license plate smeared with mud. The passenger wore a hoodie pulled low, face hidden. Patricia rushed to file an emergency protection order, and the detective issued a fresh arrest warrant. But we all knew Oscar had planned this. He probably had a new name and new papers already. That afternoon, I broke down in my parents' living room. The guilt poured out of me, how I'd brought this man into our lives, how I'd put everyone in danger. Dad, pale and tired from chemo, pulled me close. His voice was steady. You didn't bring him here. Predators choose their targets. That's not the same as being responsible. Olivia sat on my other side. We're ending this. Together. He messed with the wrong family. The next morning at the grocery store, I was picking through apples when a woman approached me. She introduced herself as Jennifer, the same Jennifer from Rachel's files. She'd been following the news of Oscar's arrest and recognized the pattern immediately. She pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots, emails, texts, forum posts from 4 years ago. They were identical to what I was dealing with now. The same twisted language. The same calculated tactics. She offered to testify about his history. And then she handed me a flash drive filled with all her evidence. I've been waiting years, she said, for someone else to come forward so people would finally believe me. That night I was still replaying Jennifer's words in my head when my phone lit up. It was an email from my company's HR department. The subject line alone made my stomach sink, termination notice. They were ending my employment immediately, citing security concerns and reputational risk to the firm. The severance was 3 months' pay, but only if I signed an NDA promising never to talk about the circumstances. Patricia looked it over and told me to take it. We needed the money for what was ahead, and a fight with my employer would only drain energy we needed for the criminal case. The next morning, Jennifer walked into Patricia's office carrying 3 boxes stuffed with documents. She unpacked them onto the conference table, papers spilling out like a crime scene. Tom sat down beside her, combing through every page. Oscar had been using the same playbook for years. The fake accounts always had similar naming patterns, first name, last name, 123, or some variation. Within hours, Tom had built a complete digital profile, mapping Oscar's usernames, IP habits, even password recycling. Then Mom walked in with her own file. She'd spent weeks calling Oscar's relatives. One aunt finally cracked, admitting Oscar's father had been just as controlling before their divorce. There were sealed juvenile records, police visits, restraining orders. This wasn't new, his pattern stretched back more than a decade. 3 days later, Rachel called with news that made my skin crawl. Oscar's escape hadn't been impulsive. He'd been preparing for months while pretending to comply with his release terms. She'd found a storage unit he'd rented under a fake name 6 months earlier. Janet got a warrant and we all met at the facility. The manager cut the lock. Inside, rows of banker boxes labeled with women's names. Emails. Photos taken without permission. Journals documenting every interaction. Then my box. It went back 2 months before we met. He'd studied my social media, charted my routines, written which insecurities to exploit. Even the way he planned to casually meet me in that bookstore? It was all in there. Helen decided enough was enough. That weekend, she invited every known victim to her home, Jennifer, Monica, Kate, and me. We sat in her living room, trading stories. That's when it clicked. He picked women with certain traits, conflict avoiders, close family ties, careers where reputation was everything. He'd been hunting us like prey. The following week, Tom created fake social profiles matching Oscar's victim type, young women posting about family, career milestones, and nothing controversial. Within 3 days, friend requests started rolling in. Messages that began light and friendly, but quickly turned manipulative. Tom traced the IPs. Oscar was still hunting. Tuesday afternoon, downtown Minneapolis. Jennifer froze when she spotted a familiar coffee shop, the one where Oscar had first approached her 5 years earlier. Through the window, we saw him talking to a young woman who looked uneasy. I called Janet. Monica slipped inside to warn the woman. Oscar saw her and bolted out the back. The police were there in minutes, but he'd melted into the crowd. That Friday, Dad finished his last chemo. The oncologist said things looked promising. As nurses removed his four, he squeezed my hand and smiled, the kind of smile that said we'd survived more than just cancer. The next week, Patricia filed the civil suit, intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation, economic interference. 4 victims ready to testify. She believed we had a strong shot. Then came Oscar's biggest mistake. 10 days later, Tom's monitoring software pinged. Someone had logged into one of the fake accounts. The IP address? Derek's apartment. Derek, one of Oscar's oldest friends, immediately called Tom, swearing he'd had no idea. Oscar was squatting at a motel nearby, stealing his Wi-Fi. Janet moved fast. We met the officers in the parking lot. Room 217. 20 minutes later, Janet stepped out, shaking her head. The bed was still warm. He'd slipped out through the bathroom window less than 10 minutes before we arrived. Inside, they found a laptop, 3 burner phones, and piles of printed emails. Janet held up one sheet, messages between Oscar and someone signing off as V, discussing ways to hack my accounts and plant spyware on my devices. The technical details made me sick. He'd been orchestrating this for longer than we'd even guessed. Back at the station, the cybercrimes unit dug into the laptop while I sat with Mom, sipping terrible vending machine coffee. Helen and Rachel walked in an hour later, looking like they hadn't slept in days. Helen didn't say a word, just pulled out her phone and started typing. Minutes later, her post went live. Oscar's photo, a full account of his abuse, tagged to every Minneapolis community group, local news outlet, and domestic violence organization she could find. Within an hour, it had over 300 shares. Rachel scrolled through the comments, dozens of women recognizing Oscar from dating apps and bars. Women who'd had near misses. Women who said he'd made their skin crawl. Oscar wasn't invisible anymore. The next morning, I braved going back to my apartment for winter clothes. The temperature was dropping, and I didn't have so much as a heavy sweater at my parents' house. Tom came with me but waited in the hallway while I packed. The second I stepped inside, it felt like the air itself was wrong. That apartment wasn't mine anymore. It felt like it still belonged to Oscar, like he'd seeped into every corner. I was pulling sweaters from my closet when something caught my eye. A faint red glow coming from the ceiling vent above my bed. My hands shook as I climbed onto a chair and unscrewed the vent cover. A small camera fell into my hands. Still blinking. Still recording. The memory card inside had footage going back 6 months before the restraining order, before I'd even tried to leave him. 3 days later, Patricia called with news that made my stomach drop even further. The cybercrimes unit had identified Vincent Smith, a disgraced former IT specialist fired after stalking a coworker. He ran an online forum for men who claimed they were oppressed by feminism, and apparently Oscar was one of their star members. Because Vincent lived in Wisconsin and the attacks crossed state lines, the FBI took over immediately. Patricia warned me, this had just gotten much bigger than Oscar. That afternoon, Patricia got a call from a local reporter named Sarah. Oscar had reached out to her station, claiming he was the victim of a conspiracy, framed by vindictive women. Sarah wasn't buying it. She'd pulled police reports, spoken to his exes, and dug deep. Patricia put the call on speaker so I could hear the recording of Oscar's interview, where he admitted to monitoring me through my devices, making sure I wasn't spreading lies. Sarah asked if we wanted to make a statement. Patricia didn't even hesitate. The recording says enough. 2 days later, the FBI raided Vincent's apartment in Madison. They hit gold. Not just my case, but dozens of others. Chat logs from a private forum where over 50 men traded tips on how to surveil, control, and punish their exes. Oscar's username appeared everywhere. He bragged about his methods, told other men how to take back control. Agents found my personal info right alongside files on 17 other women. Suddenly, this wasn't a stalking case, it was a federal RICO investigation into organized harassment. Patricia's office turned into a war room. Jennifer, Monica, Kate, and I became key witnesses. Prosecutors explained this wasn't just about bringing down Oscar, it was about dismantling the entire network. We spent days going over evidence. It was chilling how methodical they were, a system of abuse complete with shared resources and step-by-step playbooks. Meanwhile, Mom was building something of her own. She'd started a support group for families of Oscar's victims. 8 families came to the first meeting, including parents, siblings, even one of Oscar's old roommates who'd never realized the signs. Dad went too. Listening to other parents talk about their guilt helped him finally stop blaming himself. Everyone had a story about red flags they dismissed. 2 weeks later, Tom's decoy dating profiles finally got a bite. Oscar had rebranded himself as Marcus, but the writing style was unmistakable. He sent one of the fake profiles a message, "I know what you're doing." Then he rattled off details only he could know about our honey trap operation. Tom sent everything to the FBI. Oscar couldn't help himself, every reply leaked more metadata, narrowing their search. His ego was his own undoing. Then came another bombshell, the court unsealed Oscar's parents' divorce records. 15 years ago, as a teenager, Oscar had attacked Helen when she tried to leave his father. Broke her wrist. Threatened worse if she went through with the divorce. His father had the same controlling streak. This wasn't new, it was learned behavior, sharpened over years. 2 days later, Patricia connected me with Safe Haven, a local DV organization. They asked me to speak at their awareness meeting. I stood in front of 30 people in a basement room and told them about the small things that didn't seem alarming at first, how Oscar would check my phone while I slept, how he'd show up at my job with lunch just to see me, but really to scope out who I was with, how he'd go quiet when I mentioned male coworkers and then start fights about something else hours later. The room was silent. I told them how those tiny cracks eventually became walls that cut me off from my father while he was fighting cancer. Someone recorded the talk. By morning it had 20,000 views. By the next day, 50,000. Women from all over were commenting with stories that mirrored mine. From his jail cell, Vincent saw the video. Within hours, his lawyer called Patricia. He wanted to deal. He knew where Oscar was. The network had safe houses for members in trouble. Oscar was at a cabin near Duluth owned by someone called Red Pill King. 3 days later, at 4 a.m., the arrest team moved in. Oscar had dyed his hair black, grown a beard. They found him with $30,000 in cash, 4 fake IDs and a detailed plan to slip into Canada through international falls. He fought hard enough that they had to taser him. The next day, the prosecutor's office called me in to review evidence for trial. They had boxes, more than I could count, pulled from Oscar's apartment and storage unit. Inside? Thousands of photos I never knew existed. Me at the grocery store. Me walking to my car. Me through my bedroom window. Page after page of notes, my routines, my friends, my family, my entire life mapped like a lab experiment. I started shaking. That's when Janet, the lead prosecutor, placed her hand over mine. "This was never about you," she said softly. "You were just his latest target. Men like this choose based on opportunity, not love or connection." The bail hearing came fast, and the judge shut it down instantly. Denied. Flight risk. Community danger. Oscar's lawyer tried pivoting to an insanity defense, pushing for a psychiatric evaluation. Patricia warned it could drag things out for months, but we had no choice. The eval was set for Tuesday. When the psychiatrist asked about his father's controlling behavior toward Helen, Oscar snapped. He lunged across the table and grabbed the doctor by the throat. 2 guards had to pull him off. It was all on camera. The psychiatrist testified later that Oscar showed no signs of mental illness, only a need for absolute control and a readiness to use violence to get it. The insanity defense died right there. While the legal gears kept grinding, I needed to work again. Out of nowhere, a security software company reached out. They'd followed my story. They wanted someone with first-hand crisis management experience. It was entry-level, way below my old salary, but it was something. When I told Mom I'd accepted, she cried. "You're rebuilding," she said. "That's all that matters." 2 weeks later, Dad's final chemo scan came back good. We celebrated at his favorite steakhouse. He raised his glass. To fighting the battles that matter, and knowing which ones those are. Everyone clinked glasses. Olivia wiped her eyes. We were closer now than we'd ever been. The pre-trial hearing opened at the federal courthouse. Oscar shuffled in wearing an orange jumpsuit, pale and thin, whispering constantly to his lawyer. When he spotted us, me, Jennifer, Monica, and Kate sitting together in the third row, he exploded, shouting that we were conspiring against him. Bailiffs dragged him out. 2 weeks later, Helen took the stand. She spoke about years of escalating behavior, the notebook she'd found with plans for controlling women, the rage when they left. Her voice broke when she admitted she'd failed to protect his exes by staying silent. Oscar glared at her with such venom the judge ordered 2 extra officers to stand between them. Then his lawyer announced their defense. They claimed I had manipulated Oscar from day one, scheming to get his family's money. They even produced a witness, Derek, who swore he saw me researching their finances before I ever met Oscar. The prosecutor let him talk, then dropped coffee shop security footage from that date, showing Derek in Florida. Within minutes, Derek cracked, admitted Oscar promised him $50,000 to lie. He was arrested in court for perjury and witness tampering. Rachel testified next, walking the jury through Oscar's history. girlfriends vanishing mid-semester, restraining orders, hidden cameras in his college dorm, harassment that cost him his first job. That night I couldn't sleep. Dad sat with me in the dark, telling me about waiting for his biopsy results, how fear feels worse than the fight. We both knew exactly what tomorrow would take out of me. The morning of my testimony I threw up twice before court. 4 hours on the stand. Every text. Every threat. Every break-in. His lawyer tried painting me as vindictive. Patricia's redirect gave me the chance to tell the truth. I just wanted to be there for my father without Oscar's interference. Tom from the FBI followed, showing the jury the digital trail, fake accounts, GPS trackers, spoof numbers. Timestamps proved Oscar spent 8 to 10 hours a day harassing us. Monica told them how his lies cost her the nursing job she'd built for a decade, driving her to a suicide attempt. Kate described losing her daughter for 3 weeks after he faked abuse evidence. Jennifer talked about moving across the country 3 times trying to escape. Then the prosecutor rolled in 3 boxes from Oscar's storage unit. Trophies from every victim, my grandmother's bracelet, Monica's nursing pin, Kate's daughter's drawing, Jennifer's diploma. The jury stared in stunned silence. During lunch, a woman approached me in the hallway. She said she'd just started talking to Oscar before his arrest. He'd seemed kind, supportive. She thanked me for saving her from what could have been next. That afternoon, against his lawyer's advice, Oscar took the stand. He called us all crazy exes, claimed the videos were consensual, the break-ins were him retrieving belongings, the fake accounts were protecting his reputation. On cross, he admitted to everything, but justified it as normal. Filming women without consent? They should expect it. Breaking in? I had a right. Monitoring exes online? Everyone does it. His own lawyer put his head in his hands. The judge finally stopped him, sent the jury out for closings. The prosecutor walked right up to the jury box and told them exactly who Oscar was, a man who viewed women as property to be controlled and punished for leaving. She laid out the pattern, the victims, the evidence. Oscar's lawyer tried to soften him as a heartbroken man who went too far. No one was buying it. The jury was out for only 3 hours. While we waited, my phone buzzed. 2 more women from Oscar's high school had come forward to the FBI. New cases were already opening. We gathered at Helen's house, too many reporters at the courthouse. No one could eat. When the call came, we raced back to court. Guilty. On everything. Stalking. Harassment. Criminal threats. Breaking and entering. Theft. Revenge porn. Conspiracy. Fraud. Witness tampering. And more. Within a week, the FBI had arrested 17 men from Oscar's network in 5 states. The case made national news. 3 states changed their revenge porn laws because of it. Then Dad's 6-month scan, cancer in remission. Over dinner, just the 2 of us, he told me I'd saved him too, by showing him how to keep fighting when it mattered. At sentencing, we each read victim impact statements. Helen went last, reading a letter to her son. The man I raised died the day he chose to hurt women instead of respecting them. Oscar erupted, screaming that we'd ruined his life. Guards had to hold him down. The judge barely looked at him while sentencing, 15 years in federal prison. No parole. Lifetime stalker registration. Permanent restraining orders for all of us. As they dragged him out, he was still muttering about conspiracies, still convinced he was the victim. Walking out of that courthouse, I didn't feel joy. Or relief. Just empty. Patricia walked beside me. Justice is step 1, she said. Healing takes longer. And for the first time in months, I believed her. 3 days later, Helen called and asked if I could come by. She said the other women Oscar had hurt wanted one last get-together before we all started moving forward with our lives. When I walked into her living room, Monica was there with her nursing textbook spread open on the coffee table. Kate had brought photos of her kids, smiling, happy, finally back home with her full custody restored. And Jennifer held out her hand to show us an engagement ring from the man she'd been too afraid to date while Oscar was still stalking her. We exchanged numbers, but we all knew we needed space to heal. Seeing each other would always stir up the memories, both good and bad, of what we'd survived together. Helen made sandwiches and we ate mostly in silence, each of us thinking about how one man's obsession had splintered so many lives. When we hugged goodbye at the door, there weren't many words, but we all understood, we'd made it through the worst and now, finally, we could start living again. That night, I went back to my apartment for the first time since his arrest. Every inch of it was haunted. The couch where we'd watched movies before I knew the truth. The kitchen where he'd made breakfast while secretly plotting to destroy my family. The bedroom where I'd trusted him completely. By morning, I'd called my landlord and given my notice. No matter how much I cleaned or redecorated, this space would always feel like his. 2 weeks later, I started my new job at a marketing firm downtown. On my first day, my manager asked about the gap in my resume. I told her the truth, the stalking, the trial. She didn't flinch. She told me they'd had another employee go through something similar, and if I ever needed time for therapy or court, just to let her know. Then she showed me to my desk and treated me like any other new hire. It was exactly what I needed, normalcy. Dad and I brought back our Thursday morning coffee tradition, but now we talked about the things that mattered. He opened up about the fear he'd felt during chemo, how he'd wanted to call me but respected the space Oscar had forced between us, and how guilty he felt for not spotting the danger sooner. I told him about the constant surveillance, the manipulation, and the strange emptiness that followed when the fight was finally over. We both had cancer stories now, his physical, mine emotional, and somehow that made us closer than ever. The stalking survivors group met every Tuesday in a church basement. After my 3rd meeting, the facilitator asked if I'd be a peer mentor, since I was one of the few who'd gotten real justice. Most members had restraining orders that were ignored, cases dismissed for lack of evidence, or were still stuck living in fear because the system hadn't caught up with modern stalking tactics. I started telling my story to new members, teaching them how to document everything, how to build airtight cases, how to stay safe while gathering proof. Mom went a step further. She launched a nonprofit called Shield Network, connecting stalking victims to resources. She tapped her old military contacts to set up safe houses and used her logistics background to coordinate legal aid and therapy. Dad became her right hand, managing the finances, attending fundraisers. Their marriage had never been stronger. 6 months after the trial, Patricia forwarded me a letter from Oscar. It had come to her office from prison. She'd already filed it as a violation of the no-contact order, something that could add time to his sentence. The letter was nothing but blame, conspiracy theories, and zero remorse. I read it without flinching, mentally filing it away as more proof I'd made the right choice in exposing him. Olivia and I started having sister Sundays, cooking dinner together and talking about the things we'd been too afraid to say before. She admitted she'd seen the control creeping in early, but hadn't known how to bring it up without sounding jealous or petty. We came up with a code word, something we could text or say if we ever felt unsafe, a silent alarm only we'd understand. 8 months after the trial, we threw Dad a party for hitting 1 full year cancer-free. Halfway through dinner, I realized I hadn't thought about Oscar in weeks. No more constant glances over my shoulder. No more panic every time my phone buzzed. I was trusting people again, cautiously but genuinely. The following Thursday, I was pouring Dad coffee at our usual spot when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For the first time in years, my heart didn't spike. It was just a wrong number, someone looking for a pizza place. I smiled, deleted it, and Dad noticed. "You've really moved on," he said. And he was right. Oscar had stolen months from my life, but not my ability to live it. The war I'd chosen was over. And I'd won, not by destroying him, but by rebuilding everything he tried to take away. If you enjoyed today's drama, just imagine what's waiting in the next one. Hit like, subscribe, and let's go find the next train wreck together. Thanks for watching.